It's really hard to overstate the extent of the damage here in Sinzig. Behind me you can see an upturned car resting on a building. It's a shocking sight, but there are scenes like this across this town. Mud covers everything, as you can see behind me. People's possessions, or what's left of them, that is very little, piled up in front of their homes. We've seen smashed windows across this town. Really quite unimaginable scenes. In certain parts we've seen thousands of plastic water bottles simply washed up from the overflown river. As you can hear, there's some heavy machinery behind me. The cleanup operation is very much underway. Now, one truly extraordinary thing that we've been seeing here across the town is the watermark left by the receding river. As you can see, the streets here are no longer filled with water, but you can definitely see the legacy of just how high that water came. The watermark reaching above most front doors, in some cases above first floor windows, which explains how at least 12 people lost their lives here in the early hours of Thursday, 12 residents of an assisted living facility. Now, we know that the total death toll in Germany has now risen to 133, and that death toll is expected to rise yet further. Don't be surprised to hear that people really are in a state of shock here. I spoke to one man who said that he'd been extremely lucky. He'd been spared. He lived on the other side of the river in this town, where the water didn't come up quite so high to the residential areas. But he said that he was here assisting his friend's parents, whose homes had been severely affected by the rising water and, of course, the mud damage. He said he'd never seen anything like it. This was a man in his mid-60s. I also spoke to a woman who lives very close by, about 50 meters from here. She said that authorities had told them explicitly that the water would not come to their front doors, and she said that what actually happened was that her bungalow was filled with water entirely within the space of 5 minutes, destroying absolutely everything in her home. She said that she was shocked, also extremely angry that people hadn't told her in advance that she and her neighbors were at such risk. And Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the German president, is due to arrive in the region today. Whether or not he'll have words to comfort the shocked, devastated residents of Sinzig and the entire region remains to be seen.
And we have warned for decades. The first report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been published in 1990, and in principle everything has been written there. And I mean, it's a very simple physical principle that as the earth warms, the atmosphere can hold more water vapor, and this is latent energy, as we say. And so if rainy weather, if severe weather is expected, okay, then the extreme rainfall can even become more extreme. And this is what we are seeing here. And so all we can say is that climate change is with us. It's not in the future. It's right there, not only in Germany, not only in Belgium, not in Europe, worldwide.
With us right here, you say, Mujib. I mean, essentially, you argue that we have reached our capacity.
I mean, we are always asked how good our predictions are. And I keep saying that there are, of course, uncertainties with regard to the predictions, and that climate models are not perfect. So there is a limit to predictability. But on the other hand, there is also a limit to adaptation. And this is what we are seeing right now. If rainfall is too strong, people can't really adapt anymore, and then things like what we are now observing in Western Germany are happening, and we can't really do anything about it. These are the two sides of one coin, and this coin is global warming. So my first book that I wrote in 2003 is entitled Record Flood and Heat Waves. Okay, and so our models predict exactly this. It may be that in 1 year we have extremely warm conditions. We had an all-time high in 2019, the highest temperature that has been ever measured in Germany at 41.2 degrees. But on the other hand, we had so much record-breaking floods in the last decades during this century, although these kinds of floods should occur only once a century, okay? And so once again, we are facing more extreme weather, and it will become even more severe in the future as global warming continues. Big problem is that climate change is a global problem. And so all countries need to act. Just one example. So China, for instance, contributes about 1/3 to the global CO2 emissions. The United States, another 15% or so. And if we look at the global CO2 emissions, and CO2, carbon dioxide, is the main gas with respect to global warming, then since 1990, I mean, since the first report of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and since the topic is very high on the political agenda, the CO2 emissions, the global CO2 emissions have increased by 60%, 60. And so this shows that so far, at least, the world's nations haven't really taken climate change seriously.